By now, in this series, you've probably noticed a pattern. We keep coming back to the same idea from different angles. Watering by observation instead of a fixed day. Checking light with your hand instead of assuming. Understanding humidity instead of guessing. Today, we're pulling all of that together into one honest conversation about care schedules. Because there's a version of schedule that actually helps you, and a version that quietly sabotages everything you've learned so far. Let's separate the two. A newer plant owner once proudly showed me his color-coded spreadsheet, a full month mapped out with exact watering days, exact fertilizing days, even exact days to check on each of his 12 plants. It was genuinely impressive as a piece of organization. It was also, unfortunately, working against him. 2 of his plants were sitting in a noticeably darker corner of his apartment than the rest, but his spreadsheet treated every plant on the same rigid 7-day watering cycle regardless of location. Those 2 plants were slowly waterlogged for months, roots quietly rotting beneath soil that never got the chance to fully dry between scheduled waterings. He wasn't lacking dedication. If anything, he had more structure than most beginners ever built. The structure itself was simply pointed in the wrong direction, treating every plant as identical when their actual conditions were anything but. Chapter 1. Why we're drawn to rigid schedules in the first place. It's worth understanding why rigid schedules feel so appealing before we critique them, because the instinct isn't irrational. Schedules reduce decision fatigue. Instead of thinking about each plant individually every single day, you simply follow the plan. They feel measurably responsible, the same way a fitness tracker or meal plan feels responsible because you can point to concrete, consistent action. And for genuinely predictable areas of life, bill payments, workout routines, sleep schedules, rigid consistency really is the right approach. The problem is that houseplants aren't a fixed system, responding predictably to fixed inputs. They're living organisms responding to constantly shifting conditions. Light, temperature, humidity, season, even how recently they were repotted. Applying a rigid, calendar-based mindset to a variable, living system is where the mismatch begins, no matter how well-intentioned or organized the person following it happens to be. Chapter 2. The specific ways rigid schedules backfire. We've actually touched on this exact failure mode already, back in Lesson 5, when we discussed watering specifically. But it's worth widening the lens here, because rigid scheduling causes problems well beyond just watering. A fixed fertilizing schedule, for instance, ignores the fact that most plants need little to no fertilizer during dormant winter months when growth naturally slows dramatically. Feeding on a fixed monthly schedule, regardless of season, can lead to a fertilizer buildup that damages roots, something we'll cover in much more depth in the dedicated fertilizing pillar later in this series. A fixed rotate the plant schedule ignores the fact that a plant's need to rotate toward light depends entirely on how strongly it's leaning in the first place, which itself depends on the light category we covered in Lesson 6. A fixed repot every spring schedule ignores the fact that different plants grow at wildly different rates, and a fast grower might genuinely need repotting twice as often as a fixed yearly schedule would suggest, while a slow grower might not need it for 2 or 3 years at all. In every single one of these cases, the pattern is identical. A rigid schedule assumes conditions stay constant, when in reality, almost nothing about a living plant's needs stays constant for long. Chapter 3. What to build instead. The check-in system. The alternative isn't chaos, or just wing it whenever you feel like it. It's what we'll call a check-in system, and it's genuinely more effective while requiring less rigid mental overhead than a detailed spreadsheet. Instead of scheduling specific actions on specific days, you schedule a brief, regular moment to observe, and you let that observation determine the action, using the exact same signals we covered back in Lesson 4. Practically, this might look like a recurring reminder every few days that simply says check plants rather than water plants. During that check-in, you run the finger test from Lesson 5,
Glance at leaf color and texture from Lesson 4, and only act, water, rotate, or otherwise adjust if what you observe actually calls for it. If nothing needs attention that day, you simply close the reminder and check again at the next interval, with zero guilt and zero wasted effort. This system genuinely adapts itself automatically to every variable we've discussed throughout this entire series so far: season, light category, humidity, individual plant differences, because it's built around observation rather than assumption. The frequency of your check-ins can stay roughly consistent, even as the actions you take during them shift naturally with the seasons and conditions.
Chapter 4, where rigid timing actually still helps. To be fair and balanced here, there are a small number of places where a loosely fixed schedule genuinely does add value, and it's worth being honest about the distinction rather than rejecting all structure entirely. The check-in itself benefits from a rough recurring cadence. Checking every 3 or 4 days tends to work well for most collections, rather than checking randomly whenever you happen to remember, which risks large, inconsistent gaps. Seasonal transition points also benefit from a rough calendar awareness, knowing that early spring is generally when growth ramps back up, or that late fall is generally when it's time to start easing off fertilizer, gives you a useful mental cue to pay closer attention during those specific windows, even though the exact actions you take still depend on what you actually observe in your specific plants at that time. The distinction that matters throughout this entire lesson isn't schedules are bad. It's the action itself should be observation-driven, even if the check-in cadence is loosely calendar-driven. Chapter 5, Building Your Own Sustainable System. Let's make this concrete and actionable. Start by setting a recurring check-in reminder every 3 to 4 days. This cadence works well for most common houseplants without becoming a burden. During each check-in, run through the 4 signals from Lesson 4 quickly: color, texture, growth, and soil moisture using the finger test from Lesson 5. This entire process genuinely takes under a minute per plant once it becomes habitual. From there, only take action on what actually needs it that day. Some check-ins will result in zero action at all, and that's not a failure of the system. That's the system working exactly as intended, because it means your plant simply didn't need anything yet. Layer in the seasonal awareness from Chapter 4 as a background mental note, not a rigid rule. Expect more frequent actions in spring and summer. Expect longer stretches of nothing needed during fall and winter, and let your actual observations confirm or adjust that general expectation rather than overriding what you're seeing in front of you. Over time, especially once you've owned a specific plant for a few months, you'll start to develop an intuitive sense of its rhythms without even needing the formal check-in reminder. But that intuition itself is built entirely through this observation-based process, not through memorizing a fixed schedule from a plant tag or a website.
Rigid schedules feel responsible, but they quietly assume your plant's conditions never change. And we've now spent 7 lessons proving, piece by piece, just how much they actually do. The fix isn't abandoning structure entirely. It's shifting what that structure governs. Schedule the check-in, not the action. Let observation, built from everything we've covered on watering, light, and humidity, determine what actually happens each time you check. That's a system that adapts itself automatically to every plant you'll ever own, instead of one you have to constantly rebuild and second-guess. This complete check-in framework, along with a simple printable weekly check-in card, is included inside the free companion guide, The Confident Plant Parent, tying directly into Chapter 8. If you've been building this guide alongside the series, grab it using the link in the description below. In the next lesson, we're going through the fastest, most common mistakes that quietly kill beginner plants. The specific list to watch out for now that you understand the full system underneath it. If today's video helped you rethink how you're organizing your plant care, subscribe so you're here for it, because we're just 2 lessons away from completing this entire foundations pillar.